Hello, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
This is Hannah.
This is Bailey.
This is Butter.
Welcome to the Motocross Vault. I don't care. I like that one.
Okay.
I like that one.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is another one of my classic magazine reviews. What we're going to do is we're going to go back and look at the complete January 1995 issue of Motocross Action. Now, this is my favorite year for moto, the 90s. Really, I grew up, this is when I was really racing hardcore all the time, really into motocross at this point in my life. I was old enough to be able to afford my own bikes and stuff. Like I said, when I was a little kid, really my interest was pretty much the magazines because my parents, like as I said, weren't really into moto. So the 90s is really kind of my era. I love the racing at this era. We were still on two strokes. I wasn't really psyched with the fact that what maybe wasn't as great of racing in terms of Mcgrath dominating everything, but it was the clothes were great, the bikes were great. Everybody's having a good time. Seemed like a great year for motocross all around. And the magazines were strong at this point. You know, this was before the internet really was just starting to catch on with people. You know, I think a few people probably had AOL at this point, but it was all dial-up. Really, the magazines were king still. And the race coverage is significant in these issues. A lot of good stuff in it. And I love going back and read these magazines. Some of these magazines I've read, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 times over the years. I still love going back and reading them. It's fun to go over these. And what I'm going to do is like I've done in others, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through this issue from front to back, every page. Some pages are just, minor little ads or whatever. I'm going to go pretty quickly there. But, some of the stuff in here is pretty interesting. So I love looking back at these old issues. I'm going to upload the complete issue to my website, themotocrossvault.com as well. So you can download it and read it at your leisure as well in a PDF form, if you'd like to go through there and get a little more detail there. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the others I've done on the channel. I just went back and did a 1976 issue of Motocross Action. I've done the very first issue of Dirt Bike Magazine as well. I have all 4 issues of the iconic Inside Motocross from the early 90s on my channel. So if you go back and look at some of the older videos, they're on there for you to check out. If you'd like to support the channel, I have Motocross Vault merch available. I just uploaded some really nice, at least in my opinion, of course I designed it, so it's probably I'm a little biased there, but I just uploaded some cool KTM stuff. I'm working on an evolution of KTM's motocross bikes over the years, and I've uploaded some individual ones based on the 1998 model, the 2003, and also the 1995 KTM. It's definitely some big changes there in that era. You can find them in my Teespring store. The link will be in the description below. So if you'd like to support the channel, I would very much appreciate that. If you could like, subscribe, and share on social media as well, I would very much appreciate that. Help grow the channel and the community here. If there's a particular issue you'd like me to do, let me know that as well. I have thousands of motocross magazines back here. I'm slowly going through and scanning them, uploading them as well, and we'll do more of these. I think I've got some pretty good feedback from people. I think people enjoy these old magazines. Some people had them back in the day, got rid of them, what have you. I'm lucky enough to still have most of mine. So anyway, I love sharing this. I love doing this. And if you could like, subscribe, and share on social media, I would very much appreciate it. Here is the story of the 1995 January issue of Motocross Action. All right, we're going to start here with the cover. And as you can see on the front here, we have Mike LaRocco on the mighty Kx250. And this is a pretty shocking thing on the cover here. At this point, Motocross This Nations was owned by America. We had won every one from, I think, 1981 until 1993. And this one in 1994 was the first one that we had lost. It was 13 years straight, and then we finally went down, lost to Great Britain, and this issue covers it. Of course, this had happened a couple of months prior to this, but the magazines clearly are always, there's a little bit of a lead time there, putting it and publishing it. And back in these days, of course, you couldn't watch it live on the internet. You might have had 1-800-PRO-RACE about this time. Probably at 95, they probably existed, although I don't remember if they covered the Motocross This Nation. You would have probably had to subscribe to Cycle News to find out what was going on at this point, or watch Motor World. Of course, Motor World would have covered it as well. So definitely a shocking result. I think everybody did not see that one coming, but if you've ever actually watched this race, it was a very different track, a track completely unlike anything here in the U.S. It was basically like almost like a TT track rolling through these hills. It's completely flat, no berms. Actually, not. I guess flat's maybe not the word to say. There's hills, but the track itself has It's like flat like concrete, just high speed like a speedway track, and it just wasn't really set up for American style racing and American style bikes. I remember Emig took his 125 over that he'd been using in the Nationals. It just was not set up for this really high speed track. Now here on the inside page here, you have an ad for Terra Firma, the video. This was a incredibly important video at the time. The 90s were a great year. This whole thing with VHSs kind of exploded. You had Krusty Demons of Dirt, and then Terra Firma here, which was probably more race focused. Krusty was really just a freestyle video, guys doing crazy stuff on the hills. And this Terra Firma series from Fox Racing had a lot more kind of race footage in there, but it did have, fun video segments like Doug Henry here playing at his house. And the only thing I didn't like of this weird Elvis thing, I don't know whose idea it was to stick Elvis in here, but that was a whole strange deal. But the video itself was awesome. The first one's probably not my favorite. I think maybe 2 or 3 is probably my favorite in this series, but they're all really good. All really great. On the next page, of course, you have some Fox Racing gear. Fox was awesome in this era. Loved most of the stuff. This one year, this Image Racewear, maybe not my favorite, the giant fox on it. I like the colors and what have you, especially the earth tones like the forest green and the rust red, the navy. Really good looking color combos. I did find this particular jersey, the FX jersey, to be a little bit busy, but great year for Fox. On the next page, we have the gloves. They very similarly go with the gear. Big fox paw, pretty good looking stuff. Certainly in the 90s it was. On page 6 here, we have an ad for Smith. Now, I don't remember these goggles, the Violator. I don't know what the point of their. To me, they're pretty hideous. I never had a set of these. I have had several pairs of Smith goggles over the years. The nice thing about Smith is they fit well over glasses, and I'm a glasses wearer. So their Smith goggles always have a little bit of a larger cut to them. So I've actually worn many Smith goggles over the years. I like them very well. Like, for instance, Oakley, even the over the glasses version of Oakley goggles, they were never big enough to fit over my glasses. Always fogged me up. So I was a big supporter of Smith, but I never had a pair of these personally. On the table of contents, you have a picture of a first turn crash at the Motocross Des Nations. You can check out the rocks there. It looks pretty rocky in that first turn. You can see Kudrowski going down. Albie's number 20. I'm not sure who some of these other guys are. In this issue, you get a test of the 95 YZ250, bike I did have and quite enjoyed. The 95 Kx250, another really good motorcycle, although I did not have one. And of course, several bits of race coverage. Here on page 8, we have an ad for Axo Sport, which was a powerhouse still at this point. Jim Hale had not yet sold the company, and it was really one of the top brands, in my opinion, in motocross at this point. Really from the late 80s until 97 when he lost interest and ended up selling it and going all the way to mechanics wear. Axo Sport was one of the premier brands in motocross, and this Axo Sport Gear was good looking. I never had any of these sweatshirts. They're not particularly interesting, but the gear itself was really great. On page 10, we have On the Main Jet by Roland Hines. I've actually heard from some people that this is a ghost-written column. I don't know who wrote it. I'm not sure if Roland actually wrote it. If he did, that's pretty cool. But anyways, I never actually bothered to read the darn things. It was one of these things I just kind of skimmed past in the magazine. No Lean Racing. At this point, No Lean had a team, a really prominent team on the Supercross and national schedule. The Sizzler No Lean Yamaha team with Larry Brooks and Larry Ward. I think Larry Ward maybe this coming year in 95, if I remember right, I think he finished second in the Supercross series, the highest finishing privateer ever. Had a great season in 95. And these bikes were really good looking machines. I always thought they were cool. I've never actually had anything from No Lean, but I think they did some really good motor work and suspension work at the time. Here on page 12, we have Jody's box. Again, he's been writing this darn thing since about, I'm thinking 78, from looking back to my old magazine, somewhere around there. And he's still writing it. Although if you read the column now, it's a lot of times it's recycled stuff about Lully Llewellyn and Jimmy Mack and all his buddies. It's got to be tough to write a column every month for 50 years, but Jody's figured out a way to do it. Competition accessories. Don't remember competition accessories. I don't know if they're still around. Tough Racing. Now, Tough Racing on here on page 14, they had some really cool stuff. They always had custom versions of Axo Sport Gear and some really cool bikes. For a few years, of course, they had a Tough Racing team. They had Keith Bones Bowen in the late 80s, and then Ronnie Titchener, and even Ron Lachine at the end of his career. Maybe in 92, I think he rode for a Tough Racing KX500 in the Nationals. Here in the dirt section, you have a nice picture of Mcgrath here on the right. Albie, who was just getting ready to come over to the U.S. Series. It was a three-time world champion at this point, and had won the 250 crown 2 years in a row, and then had run the 125s, and I'm thinking maybe 92. And I think a lot of us thought he was really going to be the next big thing I remember watching him, and I went to the USGP a couple of years when it was at Budds Creek, and I was really impressed with him. He actually won one year when I was there, and I really didn't know much about him at the time. I didn't follow the GPs to any great extent, but I think a lot of us thought Albie's going to come here and really kick some ass, but he had a real hard time. I think probably he should have sat out that first year of Supercross. He ended up, if I remember right, separating his shoulder at the first round at Orlando in some really nasty whoops. And from there, it was just kind of downhill. And he never really got up to speed here in the U.S. It was one injury after another. And although he did end up winning a national title in, I'm thinking, 99. So he did finally get that national title, but it was a tough couple of years when he first transitioned over here. On page 16 and 17, we have a ad for PowerPrint and Logic. Interesting spelling there. Pants from Answer Racing. Love the 90s. These colors are awesome. I particularly like that one at the bottom here with the purple and orange. It's good looking stuff. Obviously, it's very busy today. It would maybe look a little crazy, but in the 90s, this was good looking stuff. I've always been a big fan of Answer Racing. They've had some great gear over the years, and the stuff in 95 was pretty good looking stuff. Here in the dirt section, we have some pretty interesting moves in the industry. Roy Jansen, who is the director of AMA Racing, is the man in the middle of a Supercross controversy they had going on then. Over the years, there's been several promoter battles with the AMA and what have you, and this was another one of these that was going on at this time. Eventually, the worst one was probably in 2002, if I remember right, where they actually had a split, and the AMA went with tried to promote their own series and had with Jam Sports, and that turned out to be just a total nightmare. And if you ever wonder why the FIM is involved in our racing to this very day, it's because of that split with the AMA and Feld. I guess maybe it was Clear Channel at the time, where they had tried to have two separate series, and then they went with the FIM as the promoter of the quote-unquote legitimate series, and then AMA tried to do one through Jam Sports. In the end, they got back together. There were some lawsuits and what have you, but the long and short of it is now we have the FIM involved in our series, in my opinion, to our detriment. But in any case, that's up to debate, I suppose. Up at the top here, you have rhino skins. This was a thing that I'm not sure why it didn't catch on me. That's obviously hideous, but it made a lot of sense in terms of having more area for your motorcycle to display sponsors. That's a big issue even today where they try to get sponsorship, and these would certainly have helped in that realm, although they looked hideous. There might have been an issue as well with the bikes being overheated. The manufacturers too, since they don't sell this, might not have been too psyched that it certainly doesn't look like a stock CR. I don't know, but for whatever reason it didn't catch on. The only race I can remember ever seeing it at was the USGP. They ran them. I think maybe Honda of Troy ran some, and they were just kind of a niche product. Randy Lawrence here, he is going to the Splitfire team. He is the brother of Phil Lawrence, Factory Phil Lawrence, and would end up as the mechanic of Jeremy Mcgrath, actually, when he went to Troy Suzuki a couple of years after this. Certainly been around. He was like a bicycle guy as well, I believe. Down here at the lower left, you have Ali Seymour, who's going from Kawasaki, I believe, to the Yamaha Big Rig to wrench for Kevin Windham. And he would be Kevin's mechanic for many years. I'm not sure if he stayed with him his entire career. He may not have made the jump to when he came back and went to Honda, but to the I guess the Factory Connection team. But he was definitely, I think he was a real fast guy in his own right at one point in maybe the late 80s, and Ali was as mechanic for many years. Factory Phil, who is leaving Team Suzuki at this point, I think, to go on a privateer bike, maybe? I'm trying to remember what he rode in 95. I think he was on a privateer Kawasaki, if I remember right. He had been with Factory Suzuki a couple of years, and that had gone sideways. You have Mike Kudrowski. He had got rid of his mechanic Shane Nally. Now, it says here in the dirt section that they had some problems in 94. I don't remember hearing about this. Apparently, he had tried to quit at one point during one of the run up to one of the races. And in 95, Mike had hired Brian Lunas, who was a longtime mechanic of Bob Hanna, Rick Johnson, also, I think, Damon Bradshaw at one point. Brian, very controversial guy at the time. He seemed like a bit of a hothead to me on the outside looking in. If you've ever listened to the Whiskey Throttle show, he did a great Whiskey Throttle show with those guys, maybe last fall. It's really worth listening to. Brian's an interesting fellow, but I always thought that this didn't go well. Mike ended up retiring the year later, and at least maybe apocryphal, but it was said that Lunas had told Kudrowski he should retire, and he did. So a lot of us thought that maybe he might have had a play in Mike retiring before his time. But anyway, I don't know what really went down there. It's up to debate. Here on the next page, on page 20, you have a ad for Penske Racing Shocks. Now, Penske had a team Well, actually, they were one of the sponsors of the Boyson team. And I remember these shocks were a big deal. They were on like Formula One or Indy cars or something at the time. I think they were pretty darn expensive. I don't know if anybody actually ran them other than maybe some pros like John Dowd. You got to figure that by this point in the 90s, people weren't swapping out shocks. They were getting stuff revalved. In the 70s and 80s, the shocks weren't designed to be modified or rebuilt or anything. So the easiest thing to do and the least expensive thing to do was typically to get them swapped out. You just go buy a different shock, like a Fox shock or something. But by the 90s, the shocks, the quality of the stock stuff was really good, and you could get it modified by someplace like Race Tech at the bottom left here with their gold valves or something like that, and end up with some pretty good performance. So I'm not sure that there was a ton of market for a really high-end product like the Penske shock, but it certainly garnered a lot of buzz in the mid-90s. Dr. Dirt's, I remember seeing these ads. Never ordered anything from Dr. Dirt's. Don't know if the old doctor's still around. Here on page 22, we have an ad for the dirt bike calendar. I have a bunch of these calendars going back to the 70s. They're really cool. They have some great photography in them. Always enjoyed those as well. Now, here on the right, we have the Thor Velocity gear. Love this gear. I still have this gear. Actually, now I bought it back in 95, and I still have it in my collection of stuff. If you put it on now, of course, that turtleneck sweatshirt he's wearing is really hot. Those old gel prints were... they didn't breathe worth a damn, particularly compared to like a modern synthetic or something, but they look great. I mean, the colors on that outfit, it is still as vibrant now, 25 years later. It hadn't faded a bit. Looks phenomenal, that stuff. It really was tough, and those pants are really well built. So I really love this year of Thor. I know some people don't really love it, but this Velocity stuff here on this on pages 23, I guess, and 25 and 26 here. Really good looking stuff. I didn't like this red and purple as much as the yellow. The yellow was by far my favorite, but I think all of it's pretty good looking stuff. Afm Sprockets. I remember these were, I never ran one of these. They were sponsoring Team Yamaha for many years. And like I said, I was always like kind of a Rinthal guy personally if I went with aftermarket sprockets, but I'm sure it was pretty good stuff. Here on page 26 and 27, you get an ad starring Randy Lawrence, who again was a mechanic. I always thought it was weird that he was, maybe they were just going for a look. He had that bleached blonde hair, and the JT at the time was looking to try and keep themselves above water. This is really my least favorite era of JT. JT was kind of off the rails at this point. They were, I think John Gregory was already more interested in paintball at this point. He'd become kind of disillusioned after they'd been sued several times and just was over the whole motocross thing. And this era, none of this gear was that great. I actually bought some JT pants the year before because they were on discount, and they immediately fell apart. I was not happy with the quality. I bought them as a practice set, so it wasn't that big a deal, but the seams came apart. It just seemed like it was junk. My Axo Sport stuff from 92, I still have it, and it's still put together like iron, so well put together. And this JT stuff felt like it was literally half the quality. So at this point, I think JT was kind of just asleep at the wheel. Now, while some of the gear I don't think was that great, look, and some of this casual wear is pretty decent. I like some of the t-shirts. The JT t-shirts are pretty sweet. I like this. Several of these actually weren't bad. I had a JT Racing hat, one of these hats on the next page. This one with the flames. I had that, and I thought that was pretty decent. All these hats actually look pretty decent, actually, to be honest. So maybe their casual wear wasn't so bad, but their gear, I think, left a little bit to be desired. Here on pages 32, we have the start of the test of the 1995 YZ250. Now, it's interesting this era. This is the last year for this body style. I wasn't a huge fan of the 93 and 94 look, but for some reason, even though it's probably the most ridiculous looking, I love the 95. I mean, the frame is lavender of all things. It's got like lightning bolts on the damn side panels. I would say it's like you hashtag lavender and lightning bolts for the 95. I really like this bike, though. It was a really great engine on it. Super smooth, easy to hook up. Really, really enjoyed this motorcycle. My only beef with it was it had some issues with detonation. If you ran pump gas on it, it would detonate. It really didn't have a ton of top end power, but the motor was super easy to use. Really a good motorcycle, actually. And I think this won Motocross Action's 250 Shootout this year in 95. These bikes, even though maybe they weren't like as awe-inspiring in a lot of ways as like the Hondas were super fast and the Kawasaki's had incredible suspension, but the Yamahas in the 93 to 95 era, they were really kind of great jack-of-all-trades, do-it-all machines. They didn't turn super tight, but they also didn't head shake. The motors were super easy to use, and they were kind of sneaky fast. They hooked up really well. And with some mods, like if you put the the long rod kit or something on this thing. It turned into an absolute rocket. I remember in the 94, 95 year, these were just hole shot machines. They ripped all kinds of hole shots. So I think if you did a few things to it, it turned into an absolute rocket. I left mine stock, but I was super pleased with it. I thought it was perfectly fine as it was. Here on pages 39, you have the ad for DG Performance. Again, DG at this point was kind of a niche player in motocross. I mean, I think they kind of were no longer like a top tier player like they were in the 70s. They had kind of transitioned to ATVs mostly in the 80s, and at this point I think they were still offering some stuff like carburetors and pipes and what have you, but it seems like they kind of transitioned to maybe older vintage stuff and whatever a little bit after this era. Here on page 40 and 41, you have a rundown of America's top 10 250 national riders. At the time, Mike LaRocco had just clobbered everybody in 94. He was by far the best guy in the 250 class. LaRocco had an awesome season on that KX. Loved that bike. It's interesting they picked Jeremy Mcgrath here as number 3. I guess this is just going by how they finished in the standings. Maybe not a subjective answer on that whole deal. But Jeremy wasn't really much of a threat in 94 outdoors. But this year in 95, he would really kind of come into his own. He really got serious in the off season and started kicking everybody's butt. So 95, 96, man, Mcgrath. I think some people just don't give the guy enough credit for how good he was in motocross. If he had actually wanted to race motocross, I think he could have been one of the greats in both disciplines, but I don't think his heart was in it until maybe this year. But once he put his head into it, man, he was really fast. If you ever watched him live in this year, he was just ridiculously fast. John Dowd, he was on the no lean bike and had gotten moved up to the factory team mid-year after Mike Craig had tripped on his boot and hurt his ankle and been fired. Dowdy was really great this year. I think he won maybe a couple of motos, one or two at least, in 94. And in 95, he was really fast on the factory team as well. Kudrowski probably could have been the national champion in 94. He was, trading motos with Mike LaRocco early on, but ended up breaking his hand, I think, in Unadilla. And that kind of torpedoed his chance of defending his title. But he was super fast this year. But in 95, he just seemed like his heart wasn't in it. Maybe because Lunas told him to retire. I don't know. But 95 would not be his best year. And then Stanton, he actually retired at the end of 94. He had an off year in 94. He started, he became a vegan or a vegetarian, I think, and lost a bunch of weight and just didn't have that pop anymore and was kind of over it. It's interesting to see Kyle Lewis, again, the No Lean Sizzler team, super prominent for a privateer team. They got a lot of press, and they were a really good team this year. And with Larry Ward and Kyle and Larry Brooks, they had a lot of top guys out there. Here on the next page, we got an ad for Power Bar. I don't know if Power Bar's still around, man. I remember I used to eat these. These were my go-to before races. I'd always get like the berry flavor. Some of these things were just hideous. None of them were good. I will say that. None of them tasted great, or they're like kind of like chewing on bark filled with sawdust. But the thing was, it was a good light meal to give you a little bit of energy before the motos and stuff. And it was I bought into the hype and was a big Power Bar eater in the 90s at that point. They have a few interviews here with the top riders: Mike LaRocco, John Dowd, Jeremy Mcgrath. Pretty interesting to see, Mcgrath. I wonder if he had, when they did this interview, realized he was really going to buckle down and really start kicking some butt. But somewhere during that off season, he really kind of came alive and started kicking tail there and really, really had an amazing year in 95. Here on the page 47, we have an ad for MSR's System 6. I was never a fan of this gear. Like, Malcolm Smith has had some good gear at times over the years, but this is not my favorite. This year when LaRocco's on it, it's really some hideous. It's so busy. I don't even really care for the colors. It's so funny because all this gear is crazy. I mean, this is not really that much different than the Fox stuff or the Answer stuff we saw earlier, but somehow this combination of the graphics and the colors, the style just doesn't appeal to me as much. I'm sure there had its followers, but I always thought the MSR stuff in the mid-90s was not that great. The weird little thing with the triangles, and I don't know. It just was kind of busy to me. I remember one year they had like little pieces, looked like they had rice or some kind of a weird diamond plate stuff on his on the back of the pants. It's like clearly they were trying to go with the crazy colors in the era, but something just, to me at least, seemed a little off on this stuff. I was never a huge fan of the System 6 gear. We have a continuation on 51 of some more interviews. You have Brian Swink, who passed away maybe 2 years ago. Swink, this 95 and 94 RM250 was not a great bike. And I think, Swink even admitted later in his career he should not have gone to Suzuki. It was not a great era to be, particularly when he was transitioning to the 250. Their 125 was really good, but their 250 was garbage. I had a 95. I hated it. And there's no doubt, I think, that that bike probably held back, whether it be Albie, because Albie, when he came here, he went from a full works bike to this production Suzuki, which was a piece of and I don't think it helped any of the guys on the, and I don't think Suzuki had nearly the resources that Honda and some of these other teams had either. They start out with a crap bike and they didn't have the resources to really kind of make it better. So I definitely think it hurt them as far as their competitiveness in the long run. You have some more interviews. You have an interview with Jimmy Button here on page 54. Now here we also have an ad for Axo Sport Gear, which again, I think the 94, 95 stuff is really great looking. That's Eric Kehoe there in the Indigo. Really good looking stuff. I like this era quite a bit. There's some really good Axo stuff gear in that era for sure. Now on the next page we have an ad for Pro Circuit. Now Pro Circuit again is still around. They've been a powerhouse in motocross since at least the early 80s when they were Anaheim Husqvarna and really kind of transitioned to Pro Circuit. I don't know, maybe around 82, 83 he made that transition, but pretty much since then they've been really one of the, if not the preeminent hop-up shop in all of motocross. And I love some of this Pro Circuit stuff. That split fire jersey is really cool. I actually had that orange and purple Team Pro Circuit Racing gear. I actually wore that jersey. I had a version of that. I wore it with my Axo Sport Gear, which kind of went with the orange that year as well. Good looking stuff. A lot of great products here. I had that vent, this carburetor vent stuff, number 32. I ran that on my CR. I got rid of the bog. In the old days before they started doing this at the factory, you'd get a bog when you go over a jump and the bike would unload. The fuel would actually splash up into the vent hose and cause a vacuum lock for a split second. And Cliff White, Jean-Michel Bale's mechanic, actually figured this out and rigged up a vent system. And then Pro Circuit and some other aftermarket companies were quick to offer kits to do this yourself. And then eventually the manufacturers put it on the bike's OEM as well. Really, Cliff White's a really smart dude. On the next page, we got an ad for Afm Sprocket. Again, I never actually ran an Afm Sprocket. It's clearly kind of a Renthal knockoff here with these grooves. Everybody's doing those grooves. I've often heard that actually those don't really do much. Think about it. Where's it going to go? It's really a cosmetic thing. It's a marketing thing. If anything, it probably actually made the sprocket less strong. But in any case, everybody had them there in the 90s. You have some more. They had a lot of interviews here. This was an interview with Larry Ward, who again was a really fast dude in Supercross. I don't think he did. God, it looks like he's on a 125 here. I don't remember him riding the 125 class on the no-lean Yamaha. Maybe he did. I guess he just rode it at the Gainesville Opener. That's so funny. I literally don't remember him ever riding a no-lean Yamaha and a 125, but apparently I guess he rode round one-on-one and then got smoked and pulled off of it after that. That's fine. So interesting. Larry Brooks, number 10. Yeah, you got three no-lean guys in the top 10 in the outdoors in 94. That's pretty impressive for a privateer team for sure. On page 61, we have Brockton Cycle Center, which I don't remember Brockton Cycle Center at all. I don't know if they're still around. You also have Recreation Unlimited. Again, don't know. I hope they're still around. On the next page, you have on page 62, we have an ad for Cernix, and I'm pretty sure Jeff Cernix is still around. A really big East Coast motorcycle dealer for quite a few years. A friend of Travis Pastrana and a big sponsor of motocross to this day, I'm pretty sure. Wind. Oh my gosh, Wind. This is stuff that you couldn't have paid me to wear. Even when I was poor and having money, I didn't want to wear Wind stuff. I always thought it looked cheeseball. Very Euro. It's interesting that the Europeans had a very distinct kind of look to them. This gear like this Wind and Wolf Sport and all this stuff I always thought it was just terrible. But you see the ads for it, and I guess some people bought it. On the next page here on 64, you have the top 10 125 riders in 94. You have an awesome photo of Doug Henry in this Fox anniversary stuff. I love this look, that classic iconic stuff from, I guess, 77, maybe 78, when Fox ran this. And this was like the 25th anniversary, I think. No, 20th anniversary, 74 to 94. You can see on his jersey of Fox Racing. So at High Point that year, all the Fox riders wore this really retro gear, and it was just awesome. I honestly don't know if you could actually buy it. But I didn't have the money to buy just some one-off set of gear in 94, but God Lord, I would have loved to have it. Great look, really cool. Henry was super fast this year in 94. He was coming back from winning the title the year before. You also had Steve Lamson, who was riding Factory Honda at this point in 94. He was probably maybe the number one competitor, I guess. Looks like he finished second in the series in 94. And definitely had a really great year riding that hideous Yoko gear. This was the year before they all went to the team look, so all the Honda guys had different gear. But a year after this, they all went with Fox. Damon Huffman, great, really fast guy on the 125s. I think this might be the last year Huffman's on 125s. I'm thinking in 95 he went to the 250s, but in any case, he was really fast on that Suzuki as well. And of course, Ryan Hughes, who was very fast on that Pro Circuit Kawasaki as well. Ryan, that's a good look. I love that jersey. That split fire, the whole split fire Pro Circuit look in this year is so good. Good looking stuff. I definitely love that look. On pages 66, we have an ad for Trolley Designs Stingray visor. In these early days, man, this was like such a popular item for Troy Lee. I think this was kind of one of the first things he actually sold, other than like his helmets, paint jobs. It was these aftermarket visors, and they were, really popular. I ran one on my helmet. I think pretty much everybody did. Back in the old days, you'd switch out your visor and stuff, and it was a really good-looking thing, and I probably made Troy multiple millions of dollars. Of course, in the next few pages, you have interviews with all the top guys. Just like they did with the 250s. You have Doug Henry, Steve Lamson, Ryan Hughes. I'm trying to remember which year Ryan Hughes came down to the wire. I'm thinking it was this year that he came down to the wire in the title and then had his chain break at the last round. I'm thinking that's 95 off the top of my head. But he was really fast on 125 for several years. Ryan was never able to pull it off, though. He never got that national title, but he was always like one of the top contenders for sure. Here you have an interesting ad for Spy Glasses with Ricky Johnson, who I think is racing trucks at this point. I think he went to truck racing after motocross. Ricky's always been in and out of the sport, doing riding classes in schools and what have you. And like many of these guys, they transitioned to some kind of off-road racing. Jeff Ward in this era was doing IndyCar, I think. So a lot of these guys, they're really great racers in one discipline, and sometimes it works better than others, but I think RJ had a pretty good career on those trucks. On the next page, we have an ad for Factory Concepts graphics. Wow. I don't remember too much about these. I don't know that I ever saw anybody running them. I don't really care for this look. In fact, I hate it. The Yamaha graphics, the Honda, actually all of them, none of them are good looking in my opinion. The Suzuki, maybe that big S is kind of okay, but it's just not my cup of tea. I think I'm a hard pass on the Factory Concepts. On page 74, we have an ad for Sidewinder and their Kraus Racing. I wonder if Sidewinder's still around. So, man, in the 80s, Sidewinder was everywhere. They were like the premier sprockets and chains to run. You always heard everybody talk about how great they were. I even bought a Kraus Racing pipe at one point, but it was total garbage and didn't work worth a damn. I actually never ran Sidewinder. I always thought they were pretty expensive, but again, for many years, they were considered like one of the top contenders as far as the quality goes. Here on the next page, on 75, we have interviews with Jeff Emig, Jamie Dobb, who was writing for Pro Circuit at that time. On page 76, we get an interview with Robbie Raynord, who was really, really fast, and I think he won maybe the first round and the last round off the top of my head, but he was really fast. But another kid that injuries and what have you, just never able to put it together. A lot of people thought he'd be like the next superstar, the next Damon Bradshaw or something, and he just didn't pan out. He was always super talented, but not able to put it together for whatever reason. Timmy Ferry, who was riding on factory Suzuki at this point, and actually I think he had a pretty good year in 95 this coming season. He was really fast on the outdoors on that RM125, maybe won a round or two. Probably his best season, actually, even though he won the Supercross series maybe in 97 without winning a race. 95, he was actually one of the fastest guys. It wasn't just consistency that did it for him. He was very fast that year. Denny Stevenson is number 9. Denny at this point is riding maybe a privateer Suzuki. I don't remember at this point. He was definitely off the factory teams, kind of getting towards the end of his career before he would transition over to the Arena Cross series. Starting on page 79, we get an O'Neill ad with Craig Decker here, who is factory Suzuki. I love this O'Neill gear. This World Force stuff is really good looking. I love the orange and purple look in particularly. Great. Although I will say this World Force pants, that logo probably weighed 10 pounds. Giant piece of plastic there. Probably good if something hits you in the leg, but it's so funny how lightweight everything is now. These pants probably weigh 4 times what a modern pair of pants would wear. Definitely that's come a long way. But this good looking stuff, I like it quite a bit. I love the Prince jersey. Again, the orange is my favorite, but all of them, even that kind of jade purple, is good looking stuff. Boots, never had any of their boots. It looks pretty cheeseball, quite frankly. And at this point, I was more of an Axo Sport boot guy, and then eventually I transitioned over to Alpine Star. I never had any of the O'Neill boots. Jerseys, I mean, they're cotton, I was always a big fan of cotton jerseys, but the design's pretty boring. None of this stuff is that attractive in my opinion. If you look at some of the casual wear, it's a meh. It's okay. The hats aren't bad. I'm sure there's some okay stuff there, but it doesn't strike me as particularly great. R&D Racing here on page 87. I don't know if that's the same R&D that was R&D Suzuki back in the day. I don't know. Could be. More interviews with the top riders. We have an interview with Craig Decker on 88. Like I said, he was coming off a pretty good year in 94. Oh, that's right. He was in 94. I guess he was on the Honda Troy team, and riding those black Honda Troy bikes. And he went to factory Suzuki in 95, and then at the end of the 95 years when he hurt his back. And come to think of it, Sloan's Honda. Don't remember that. Don't know if they're still around. We have an ad for EVS. Now EVS, I'm pretty sure is still around. They do still do. Maybe Travis Pastrana, some of these guys, I think, use some of their braces to this day. Look at that old school knee brace. On the next page here, we have an ad for Axo Sport, another ad with Eric Kehoe, who I think at this point is riding for Honda Troy in the violet, good-looking gear. These are good ads. I quite like them. On page 92, we get an interview with Bobby Moore, who was, I believe, had just won the 125 world title after many years. He was a kid that had come up in the amateurs around the time Mike Keeley was. And it ended up having some trouble getting a factory ride. This is in the early days when they didn't have the support teams and the satellite teams and what have you. And he was really fast and ended up losing his ride and going to Europe in the late 80s, rode for KTM for many years. Always really on the cusp of kind of breaking through and becoming a top guy over there. And then finally on the Chesterfield Yamaha in 94, he finally won the world title. So good for Bobby. I remember after he retired, he ended up going to, I think he managed FMF Honda at the time in the late 90s after he came back here, and really fast guy, and I understand a nice guy. I've never met him myself, but you hear a lot of nice things about him. Here on the next page, you have an ad for White Brothers, and some of these, I don't think this is a rhino skin. That's like a Cherubies maybe version of it. The rhino skins were all one piece. This is a Cherubies setup. They were designed to work with the stock body work and kind of just fill it in. I got to be honest, this one doesn't look terrible. Again, it's a neat idea, and I certainly see why they did it, but for whatever reason, it just never caught on. People didn't run them. I certainly not the best look, but from a sponsor perspective, I could see why they would be appealing. Here on page 96, you have stickers. Man, stickers were my hop up in the 80s, and I thought I couldn't afford anything else, so I ordered all kinds of stickers. The infamous back off sticker and all that crap. Big for kids on a budget like me, stickers were the hot setup for sure. Motoman, don't know if Motoman's still around. No idea. Donaldson Cycle Center, I definitely remember these ads. Again, don't know if they're still around. Good luck if you are, hopefully. And here we come. On page 100, we come to the infamous Death of Americans Motocross Destination run, the 1994 Motocross Destinations. And man, this was, again, just a bombshell at the time. People just did not expect America to lose this race. And it was really, really shocking. I mean, it was almost like a foregone conclusion. Even, some years we didn't even have the best team. We just have things go wrong. Like a year or two before this, we were losing into the last turn. And Kudrowski had to make a crazy pass. And the year before that, it was Stanton making a crazy pass. We just got lucky. It wasn't just the fact that we were the fastest guys. A lot of times we weren't the fastest guy, but we were certainly the combination of fast enough and lucky. And that luck finally ran out in 1994. We had a team of Kudrowski, Emig, and Larocco. And on paper, that should have been a really strong team. We probably should have, we certainly, I would think, had the speed, but you can look at this track here on the right. I mean, it's almost like a grass track. If you laid something out in some field, it was really fast, really smooth, like a highway, and so totally unlike anything we race here in the U.S. We just don't have tracks like that here. So no excuses. I mean, many of these tracks, if you look at like the 85 Motocross Destinations, it is like a road race, and we still somehow figured out a way to win. So no excuses. America just wasn't up to the task this year. Now, one interesting thing here, you see on page 104, you have a picture of Albertine, who actually, I believe he was actually winning this race when he hit a deer. A deer ran across the field. He hit the deer, killed the deer, and killed Albie's chances here. I have this actually race on video, and I'm positive they don't have this on videotape. Somehow they didn't catch it. I've never seen any kind of any kind of video of it, but I've almost hit a deer on my street bike, and it is a pretty scary situation for sure. Hopefully on a dirt bike you're not going quite as fast, but definitely not something you want to do is hit a deer. So Albie was lucky to come out of that not hurt. That's a man who knows how to take a hit, that's for sure. Here on pages 106, you have a little more interviews with some of the guys. Rob Herring, Paul Malin. He was one of the heroes of this. He actually beat Jeff Emig. Paul Malin borrowed Bobby Moore's bike and helped lead Great Britain to the win. And like I said, Malin is now the commentator when you watch the GPs. He's the guy that does the broadcast. Cool picture of Emig here on his works bike. Again, Emig's US bike, just probably the motor wasn't set up for 90 miles an hour up and down these hills. Probably wasn't the hot setup, but he got beat fair and square again. On the next page, we have an ad for Alpine Stars. I love these Alpine Star boots. I had a set of like these black and purple ones. Good looking boots. I always liked Alpine Stars. They're always my favorite boot to this day. Picture here of Marnik Bervoets on page 110. Bervoets was always one of those guys that was very much like Bobby Moore, always like the bridesmaid, never the bride for many years. And he was a really fast guy on the factory Suzukis for years and years in Europe, and just wasn't ever able to pull off that title. But he was a member of several really fast Belgian teams at the Motocross Destinations, including this year. Bervoets was a really fast Euro for sure. You can see Paul Malin over here on the upper right on Bobby Moore's factory bike, I'm pretty sure. Obviously different bodywork, but I think he borrowed the full works bike for this race. Another interview with Emig on page 112. The Belgian team. Chain wax. I always ran chain wax. I thought that was pretty good stuff. Still have some of it down in my garage to this day. On page 114, we talk a little bit about the ramifications of this race, rule changes and what have you, and how this is going to impact USA in the future, because they hadn't lost. The Motocross Action points out they hadn't lost in 17 years because technically they'd won 13 years in a row, but they didn't compete the few years before that because America kind of took their toys and went home and didn't race for a few years there at some point in the late 70s. You have a photo of Albie here on his work Suzuki. I always thought that wraparound number plate. I'm not sure if what the heck the design with that was. I thought it was ugly though. Definitely not an attractive plate. I also wonder just how different this works bike was than the factory bike here in the U.S. because I don't think that the U.S. bike was well liked by Albie or anybody on the team. But this European version seemed to do really well. Now, again, they could run full works bikes. The frame, none of the geometry had to be the same. It was a completely different motorcycle. It just kind of looked the same because of the bodywork. But I've always wondered just how much better that factory bike was than the one they had to race here. On the next page, we have an ad for Cinesalo. Cinesalo's 94 is probably my favorite year of Cinesalo. And Jeremy, I actually had the Mcgrath replica gear, the Cinesalo stuff he ran that year. Great looking stuff. Some of the stuff Jeff Ward ran in the late 80s, early 90s was pretty good looking stuff too. But Cinesalo kind of just went downhill after this, in my opinion. I wasn't a real big fan in the late 90s, but they were really good there in the early 90s. Cherubies, looks like a Barkbuster maybe? That's pretty interesting to have a Barkbuster ad in Motocross Action. I could see this being a dirt bike, but I'm not sure how many motocross guys are running Barkbusters. I always ran like the Cycra handguards like Pastrana ran. I have my track was in the trails. I rode a lot of off-road and woods riding and stuff too, but I never liked the feel of Barkbusters. I think I only ever had one set. I ran them on my KTM EXC 200, but in general I always preferred like something more light, but I wasn't riding in super tight trees. So in any case, CTI here on page 120, I have a pair of CTI knee braces. I've blown up my knees like 3 times. Big fan of the CTI knee brace. Here we have Midwest Action Cycle on page 121. Midwest Action definitely has all these ads, and this is another of these companies. I'm not sure if they're still around, but man, they were in every Motocross Action for 20 years there. Definitely a big advertiser for many years. Scott's Performance, their kind of thing. The only thing I know they did was this steering damper. They were a big deal with the steering damper. I think all the off-road guys ran them. I never had any need for it. I wasn't running across the desert, but they were hugely popular. And it's interesting as well, this is in Motocross Action and not dirt bike. You think dirt bike or dirt rider would be a more targeted audience for their product, but I guess I see more eyeballs here in Motocross Action. This HRP Flakjack, I actually had, I think it was Extreme made a clear version as well. I ran one of those similar to this, but the problem was the clear Lexan ones. It showed your jersey underneath, which was a cool idea, but of course, as soon as it got roosted and stuff, it got all beat to crap and milky looking. So that clear plastic didn't hold up very well. So in the long run, you're better off with one that wasn't clear, in my opinion. But the HRP Flakjack, they really were the kind of the first one I think of with the suspended shoulders, kind of what the Roost 2 and several other people copied later. It's interesting, though, that HRP had been out of business for 10 years at this point. Hanna Racing Products was long since gone, but the Flakjack was still around. So I guess somebody bought that design after the main gear company went away. Here on pages 124 and 125, you have the start of the 1995 Kx250 Test. This was a really good motorcycle. These mid-90s KXs were this is probably the best era for Kawasaki. And this particular body design really was the greatest Kx250 ever, I think, in terms of its competitiveness with its, the other machines in its class. These things were like low to mid maulers, super strong engines. I wanted the 94 so bad when it came out. I rode one at a demo day, and I just loved it. Super strong motors, plus suspension, really good bikes. Now, they felt a little heavier. The perimeter frame gave them like a wider midsection, and they just felt a little, not quite as nimble as like the Hondas and stuff, but I think if you wanted something that had more torque than the Honda, the KX was a great choice. And these mid-90s Kawasaki's just romped. They were great, just really fast. Like I said, instant power. You crank the throttle on, buddy, that thing jumped. And then you can see they were really successful. The stock bike was great, and then with Kudrowski and LaRocque on these guys, they were really good outdoors, particularly. Really competitive machines for sure. On page 131 here, we get an ad for Pirate Racing Products, which I don't remember. Maybe they sell a lot of stickers for your front fender. I don't know what they're selling. Sunstar. Sunstar, I have run several of their sprockets over the years. They had one on my Project 1990 a couple years ago. They were really good stuff, and I definitely highly recommend them. Honda Troy. Of course, they had a really high-profile team at this point. They were just starting in 95 to have a much more powerful team. I believe they got Mike Craig at this point after he got fired from Yamaha. And then within a few years here, they had one of the most high-profile teams on the circuit. They had guys like eventually Larry Ward, Mike Kudrowski after he made his comeback and what have you. And Troy Racing was a powerhouse for about 10 years before it kind of just went off the rails and went out of business there. We have another ad for Answer. This Force stuff, I don't quite like it as well as the gear we were looking at earlier, but still not bad. I do prefer to the MSR stuff. We have a look back at the 1994 season on page 136. You can just see how much content is in this magazine. This magazine is like, 160 pages or something. It's a lot more stuff than you're going to find in the current magazine. A lot more race coverage, things like that. Instead, these days Motocross Action pretty much just has a bunch of two-stroke tests. And they've actually started just rerunning old tests even. You'll go in there and see an old test from like 10 years ago. And it's kind of interesting how much different the magazine industry was back then. But 94 is a great year. Of course, they touch on the Mike Craig problems after he got moved up to the factory team after Bradshaw retired. That didn't go well. He did win a Supercross, though. He won a Supercross for Yamaha. But then I think things behind the scenes kind of went sideways, and he ended up losing his ride. You have some people like Kevin Windham making a show at, I believe it was High Point. High Point, he was led a good bit of the race. Super fast kid. Clearly, he turned out to be quite a superstar. In the long run, you have Jeff Glass here. You could talk a little bit about Stanton retiring. You also have an interview with John Dowd, who was moving up to the factory team permanently for 1995 and would actually be with them until, maybe 99 was last year. I think he stayed till Yamaha till then. I'm trying to remember now, but I think somewhere around that. And then, of course, a little talk about the jersey thing, the Honda wanting to put their image all over the jerseys, be the most dominant thing on the manufacturers, the gear manufacturers' jerseys, and actually they would end up going, as I said earlier, to a full contract with Fox Racing for 1996, and all the team would be on Fox Racing. Now here on page 141, you have a cool FMF ad. I think that's really neat. The FMF truck. At this point, FMF did not have a quote-unquote race team, but they had a support truck. I guess probably went to the Nationals or maybe the amateur races. I love that FMF truck with the flames on it. That's super cool, that box fan. Definitely a cool look they should bring back. You have a Manchester Honda on the next page here on 142. The Manchester Honda would end up sponsoring Damon Bradshaw. When Bradshaw lost his ride, Bradshaw would come back in 95 this year, and then go to factory Yamaha again, and then after 96 they had a falling out, and he would go to Manchester Honda. He would ride for them in 1997. You have a cool picture of Brian Swink pulling a can over, I think that's LaRocco's Leap. He's doing that jump. Motorcycle accessory warehouse ad. You can look at these prices. It's amazing how much the prices haven't changed that much. You can basically pay the same amount for a jersey and a pair of pants in 2020 as you did in 1996, which is pretty nuts. On the next page, you have the showcases where you can find all kinds of neat little stuff. Dynaport, man, I made a mistake. I was at High Point National. The only time I went to High Point, I went to 1993 National, and I asked, they had the High Point Dynaport had a box fan there, and they were selling their pipes. And I bought one for my YZ125, and that thing was the biggest hunk of junk. Number one, it didn't fit. I had to rig the crap out of it even to get it to bolt up. It was like a cone pipe, but instead of using multiple cones like a works pipe, it had like 3 or 4 cones. It was super cheesy. It actually made the power worse. It didn't fit. It was terrible. On the next page, you have the Donnie Hansen Motocross Academy, which Donnie, after retiring after his injury, had started this, and I believe it's still going to this day. Definitely probably trained more future motocrossers than any other guy in the sport at this point. You have an ad for Motocross Action. You can subscribe for only $13.98, which is probably the same as what you would pay today, which is probably why there's less content in the magazine. Cool picture, though, of Buddy Antonez and I think Denny Stevenson here on the upper left. Neat photo, anyway. Oh, yeah, Bob's Cycle Supply, always a big supporter of Motocross Action. Always saw their ads in here. More showcase stuff, including getting your cylinder rebuilt and some ballistic racing and a bunch of other companies I've never heard of. More stuff here in the showcase. This is always cool. You know, like in the days before the internet, you'd go back here and see the showcase section, and you'd find a lot of stuff. You know, it's where you'd find some little company to fix your crankshaft or fix your cylinder if you wrecked it or whatever. This is another ad for Midwest Action Cycle. On page 56, you have another ad for Axo Sport. You'll notice that Axo Sport, it's so funny, you don't see their ads in any other magazine than Motocross Action. If I look at like Dirt Rider and stuff, you don't see their ads. I think Jody got pissed if they sponsor with anybody else. He would like threaten to pull their advertising. I think that was kind of crap that was going on at Motocross Action at the time. So it's funny, you see different gear manufacturers definitely focused on different magazines at the time, and I think that was a lot due to peer pressure or pressure put on them by Motocross Action. On page 156, you have a couple of other showcase stuff here, the tricks from the trade. I actually had, like I said, the extreme version, although mine looked different than this one this guy's wearing. I had maybe the 96 version. It was clear that I had that chest protector, one from Extreme. You have the a bit of an umbrella for your motorcycle, I guess, if your bike's sitting out in the sun all day at the races. If you had one of those nuclear red Hondas, you definitely needed this because the sun would fade those things like crazy. So it's kind of a neat idea if you didn't have an easy up. All these, I actually have most of these. I may have all of them. All these little VHS tapes at the bottom right. I was a huge collector of moto video stuff and all the tapes at the time. On the next page, we have an ad for N Style. I always loved N Style's numbers. They were my favorite numbers in this era, certainly. If you're talking about standalone numbers in the days before you bought complete graphic kits, N Style was the shiznit, as they say. I really like this stuff. Although I'm not much on the graphics, particularly this year. The graphics aren't that great, but the numbers were good looking stuff. I always thought they had a real nice font to them. Great moments in racing. You have some guys I've never heard of, like Tim Aston, and then other guys I have, like Brian Manley, Doug Dubach, of course. Greg Zitterkopf, who I always thought of as a guy who rode like 4-strokes, big ATK 4-strokes in the 80s. He did some racing there, and you'd see coverage in like dirt bike, I think. Rodney Smith, of course, who would go on to be a motocross racer who raced the GPs for Factory Suzuki on the Chesterfield bikes, and then would go on after his motocross career to be a multi-time GNCC champ. So talking about guys who made transitions to other sports, Rodney was really a renaissance guy, a really fast guy in motocross and off-road. And then, of course, guys like Billy Frank as well. On the next page, you have the Axo Sport. This one's not Eric Keogh this time. It's a kid. Good-looking stuff for your kids. If they're lucky enough to have your parents buy some Axo Sport stuff, you're pretty lucky, in my opinion. And here on the back, we've reached the end of the issue, and that is an ad for Renthal. Again, Renthal was my go-to as far as sprockets most of the time. That's who I ran. It was good enough for Mcgrath and Stanton, so it was good enough for me. And always been a big fan of their handlebars and their sprockets as well. So there you have it. That's a look back at the January 1995 issue of Motocross Action. This actually was a magazine I scanned maybe a year ago or so. Originally, Brett Smith of We Went Fast and I were going to do this together. And we tried a couple logistics and it just never happened. So I figured, why not go ahead and do it? Maybe in the future I'll get him to do some collabs here. I know a lot of my other buddies, they love these old magazines just like I do. And it's fun to get their opinion as well. So if you'd like to see something like that happen, let me know as well. Maybe I'll try and work out the logistics, the technical issues we were having. Neither one of us are the most tech-savvy people, so we were trying to make all that happen. Didn't work. But in any case, if you like this, make sure you subscribe, share, comment. I would very much appreciate it. Like I said, I love all the support. You guys are great out there, and I definitely read all the comments and read anything. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, that's at Tony Blazier. That's TonyBlazier. I also have an Instagram account, same thing, at Tony Blazier, TonyBlazier. You You can find me there. I post all kinds of classic motocross photos every day. So if you like not just video content, you like classic motocross photos I've scanned from here, you can find me on Instagram as well. So until we meet again, keep the rubber side down. This is Tony Blazer. Peace.